To do that, I am going to do something here within Visual Studio, which is really handy. I'm going to go up to Debug, and I'm going to say Step Into. When I say Step Into, it's going to basically start up the application, but it's going to pause it. And we're going to be able to execute the code one line at a time and see what's going on. So when I start it up, it's going to go in through the entry point, which I showed earlier, which is the main. So main's the point where basically all the applications are going to start up. So if I hit F11, I can step through this, into the code. So I can see that we're going to create a member of the class, or an instance of the class game1, and call it game. And it's going to say we're going to use the new keyword to create that. And we're going to call the constructor when we create it. We're going to create our graphics device manager, set content root equals the content. It'll exit out, and we're going to go game1.run. And if I go and do that, go to definition again, I can see that run is a member of game. So it's something that we can't see. It's part of the XNA framework, and it's basically it's a function, a member of the game method or a class that's set within those DLL files that we have. So when it calls run, the first thing that we can see it doing is going and calling this initialize function. And you can read the comments here, and it says basically set anything that needs to be set up before we're going to run. So what we call base initialize is going to call our load content function, and load content is going to set up our sprite batch. So we had our sprite batch up here, but we're not initializing it until we go to load content. So it's going to be sprite batch equals new sprite batch and device manager, or sorry, graphics device. And where graphics device manager is basically how we access the graphics device. And when I say graphics device, I mean like your video card on your computer. Graphics device is actually your video card. And once again, when we get to where we're in the debug here, we can see a lot of useful information. If I mouse over here, I'll get a little pop-up that will show different stuff on it, and I can expand this and I can see like all these different features of that. And there's a lot of stuff in here, and I can look pretty scary right now, but we'll just ignore that, and I'll try and explain that later as well. So I keep hitting F11, step through the code, back to base initialize. That finishes off the initialization function, and then we move on to the main part of the game. So there's two things you want to do in a game. You're going to update the code and like basically move your characters, do any AI, and all of that different stuff, which is basically logic stuff. And we're going to do that within the update. And that's going to, right now we've got some things populated in here in update that was put in by XNA by default. We have basically gamepad, get state, player 1, buttons back equals button pressed. So this is an if statement, and if statements are basically ways to check something. So if this condition is true, we're going to execute this code that's down here. So we have an equals equals, which basically means like if back button state equals pressed, we're going to execute this.exit. And as I said before, this is a keyword basically to do that, to reference the class that we're currently in. So exit would be a function that exists once again within game, which is what we're inheriting. And exit basically will shut down your game for you. So this is checking to see if your back button's pressed. This is checking to see if your back button's pressed on the player 1's controller, or Xbox controller. So if I hit F1 again, it's going to skip by this .exit because it is not pushed right now, and move on to base update. When you see this base .update, it basically is calling the update in game once again. So there's a lot of stuff referencing back to that game. Because like I said, there's a lot of stuff in XNA that's done for you. You don't need to worry about like setting up the game loop. That was actually a lot of work back if you were to try and program this from like C++ as another programming language, or C within Windows, to go and set up like a game loop. Because Windows, the way that it works, it sits there and wants to wait for you to for somebody to do something, like wait for you to click the start button, or wait for you to like resize an application. It doesn't do anything in the meantime. It's sitting there waiting for you to do a command. And games don't work that way. Games are updating the screens, constantly refreshing and redrawing. The AI for whatever the enemies and stuff is running, unless you have the game paused or whatever. But you have to set up a loop so it would basically keep running over and over again. So we've got our update, which basically will do the loop for us. And that, like I said before, the update is going to be the logic and basically moving your characters and seeing if any of the buttons are pressed and stuff like that. And then down below we have our draw function. And now I'm going to have to skip through. Yeah. And so now I've basically stepped down into the draw function. So draw function is where you're going to want to draw all your graphics on your screen. So right now we only have one thing being called in there. So we're calling the graphics device, and we're running a clear function on it to clear the screen to cornflower blue. And as we saw when I first started this up at the very beginning, that the screen came up and it was just blue. So I could change this. I could change it to black, and it basically will clear the screen to black now. So, and that's another useful thing you can do while you're stepping through the code and debugging. You can change stuff on the fly, as long as you're doing it on Windows and as long as you're in the debug function. So it's really useful to be able to do that when you're working, and if you have a problem within your code. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to stop the debugging because we've basically been through the code once. Once you hit update and draw, it's just going to cycle between these two. It's going to go draw, update, then draw, update, then draw, update, and draw until your game exits. So if I run this again, we can see that the screen's black because I updated that code for black. So that's about all I'm going to show for this first tutorial, which is a basic introduction into XNA and Visual Studio. Actually, maybe one other thing I'll show is setting breakpoints, which is something very handy, and I didn't really get a lot of that when I was starting programming, to have people explain that properly to me. So in Visual Studio, if I click over here in this border, I can set it, and it'll be like a little red dot. And when I start debugging, when it hits this point in the application, it stops and pauses the code. And I can go in here and I can look at these variables. And I can go and look at the graphics device and what type of state it's in, and look at anything else. And the other thing you can do is go down here in locals, and I can look at this, which is, you can see game 1. And I can look at base, which is basically the game component of it. And I can see all of the member variables, and like there's graphic and sprite batch are two member variables that we declared in there. And take a look at that and look at their values and see that. So it's really useful. The other thing you can do is you can right click on this and go add to watch. And if you want to watch one variable, and watch like a specific state of it, and even like under here, if I was really concerned about this blend factor, I can add that to watch, and I can see that, and I can watch as I step through my code. If it changes, it would turn red here. and be able to see that. So it's really good for debugging things, because programming is difficult. You even look at commercial games and they still have a lot of bugs in them and stuff. So knowing how to go through and step through your code instead of just trying things randomly, it's really good to do. Another thing that's useful within here is going through and commenting stuff. Forward slash is how you comment something. And to do like a multi-line comment, you can do forward slash star and then do star forward slash to end it. But within Visual Studio, if I highlight these lines, I can go up here and click this comment out button, and it'll basically put the slashes in front of it for me. And if I want to remove those, then I can just do that. So that's another good way while you're debugging or writing code. If you wrote a bunch of code and you're like, oh, I want to remove this temporarily, instead of deleting or anything, you can just comment it out really quickly using those functions. So I hope this provided a little bit of insight into how XNA works and a bit about C# and that. I've posted a more in-depth tutorial on C# and programming theory out on the website, so you can take a look at that, and there's some examples of some code and stuff in there. For the next tutorial, I think I'll get into actually drawing something on the screen and be able to move it around with the mouse and stuff, or move it around with the keyboard. And so you can get a basic idea of how to take an image, get it into your game, and control it with some input. But that's all for now. We'll talk to you later.